The sound of my apartment door closing echoed through the hallway. I removed my shoes, having spent the day at work. I had been looking forward to seeing Laura, especially since she had recently graduated from college. I hoped we could celebrate together, but as I entered our living room, I experienced a shift in my emotions. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, and I could smell something faint. The atmosphere was permeated with the aroma of alcohol. My heartbeat accelerated as I observed the scene before me. My girlfriend of 3 years, Laura, was sprawled on the couch. Her graduation gown was crumpled on the floor beside her. Her eyes were half closed, and she appeared disheveled. However, it was not Laura's state that caused me to feel uneasy. It was the presence of our two friends, Jake and Shelley, who were leaning in close to her. Their faces were mere inches from hers, and their laughter was hushed but audible. Something about the way they hovered over Laura seemed unsettling. My instincts prompted me to approach them, and I demanded, "What is going on here?" My eyes narrowed as I observed Jake jump back, his phone slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Shelley pulled away from Laura, her lipstick smeared, and blinked at me with a mix of surprise and guilt. Liam attempted to explain, "We were just messing around," but I was too enraged to listen. I experienced a surge of anger as I realized the nature of their actions. Jake had been recording the entire incident on his phone, and Shelley had been engaged in a sexual act with Laura, despite her apparent inability to consent. I regarded this as a flagrant violation of privacy and personal boundaries. I swiftly retrieved Jake's phone from the floor and proceeded to delete the recorded videos and images. My hands trembled with rage as I did so. This act of violation was deeply disturbing and unacceptable. Laura, who had been sleeping on the couch, suddenly stirred and opened her eyes, her vision blurred and her mind still hazy from the effects of the drugs. She mumbled something incoherently, clearly unaware of what had just transpired. Shelley shot me a look of defiance, her voice laced with irritation. "It was just a joke. Liam, lighten up." I was incredulous at the audacity of their excuses. My anger boiled over, and I took a step closer to them. My fists were clenched. This was a betrayal of trust like no other, and I knew that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't yet comprehend as a result of Jake and Shelley's actions. I attempted to justify their actions, but I was overwhelmed by a surge of intense emotions. Laura remained unconscious on the couch, unaware of the turmoil unfolding around her. I clenched my jaw and tightened my grip on Jake's phone. It was just a joke that had taken a wrong turn. Jake insisted, his voice wavering as he struggled to regain his composure. "We did not intend to cause harm." Shelley interjected, her tone dismissive. "Yeah, lamb. Lighten up. Laura is resilient. She can handle it." My hands trembled with anger as I gazed at them. Laura's vulnerable state in that moment was evident, and I was determined not to allow them to trivialize it. "This is not a trivial matter," I stated firmly. "It is an invasion of privacy and a breach of trust. What you did was reprehensible." I observed as Jake and Shelley exchanged glances, a hint of guilt evident in their eyes. They seemed to realize that their excuses were falling on deaf ears. As I turned away from them, my attention was drawn to Laura. I gently shook her shoulder in an attempt to rouse her from her alcohol-induced slumber. She groaned softly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze was hazy, and confusion clouded her face. She mumbled, her voice still groggy. I knelt down beside her, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. I asked her if she was okay and if she remembered what had happened. She blinked at me, her memory clearly foggy. I had consumed a few alcoholic beverages with Jake and Shelley. I then separated from Laura, not wanting to overwhelm her. I reassured her that she was safe and that I was there for her. She attempted to sit up, wincing in pain. Her eyes conveyed discomfort, indicating that she had been the victim of exploitation. I turned to Jake and Shelley, my voice cold and determined. I informed them that they needed to leave immediately. I did not allow for any argument or debate. We were going to have a Jake and Shelley then engaged in a brief, somewhat uncomfortable exchange before promptly departing the scene. I observed their hasty exit, aware that this troubling discovery marked the beginning of a challenging journey for Laura and me. Once Jake and Shelley left, Laura and I were left alone in the dimly lit living room. She sat on the couch, her eyes still clouded with confusion, and her graduation gown crumpled at her side. I experienced a complex emotional response, comprising anger and protectiveness, as we commenced a discussion of the recent events. I inquired of Laura, "Liam, what did they do to me?" Her voice trembled, indicating her efforts to reconstruct the fragmented memories of the night. I took a seat beside her and grasped her hand. "They overstepped boundaries," I stated. "They exploited your vulnerability, and this is unacceptable." Tears welled up in her eyes. In her eyes, as she looked at me, I trusted them. "Liam, I thought they were my friends." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I know, and that's what makes this even more unforgivable." As we talked, Laura's phone buzzed with a text message. She picked it up and read the message. Her face contorted with anger. It was from Jake. The message was anything but remorseful. "Laura, you're blowing this out of proportion." She read aloud, her voice filled with "I was incredulous that you were the one who wanted us to record it. It is understandable that we would have a little fun." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger. "That is not true. Laura, they are attempting to deflect blame onto you." Laura's phone buzzed again, and she received another text from Shelley. She read it aloud, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. "You know, Laura, you are always the one testing boundaries. Perhaps you should take a long, hard look at yourself." I was incredulous at what I was hearing. Jake and Shelley were not only attempting to justify their actions but were also blaming Laura for the entire incident. It was an attempt to manipulate her and absolve themselves of guilt. I informed Laura that they would not succeed. Laura wiped away a tear and nodded, her determination growing. "We will not allow them to get away with this." As the night progressed, we terminated communication with Jake and Shelley, resolved to eliminate them from our lives. This decision, though painful and difficult, was necessary to safeguard ourselves and seek justice for Laura. The battle had only just begun, and we were prepared to confront it together in the days that followed. In the aftermath of the disturbing incident, Jake and Shelley's harassment and gaslighting only intensified. They appeared determined to continue their actions. They subjected Laura to a relentless barrage of text messages, phone calls, and social media messages, each one more distressing than the last. "Laura, you are overreacting. It was just a prank." Read one message from Jake. "Why are you making such a fuss about it?" Shelley chimed in with another. The relentless stream of messages wore down Laura's resilience, and she began to doubt herself. It was as if Jake and Shelley were trying to erode herself. The barrage of messages was having a detrimental effect on Laura's emotional state, prompting her to question the legitimacy of her feelings and the gravity of the incident. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Laura received yet another text from Shelley, her face reddening as she read the words aloud. "You always were too uptight," the message read. "Maybe if you weren't so frigid, this wouldn't have happened." Laura's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at me. "Liam, they're trying to make me believe I am responsible for this situation." I took her hand in my hand and squeezed it gently. "They are mistaken, Laura is not at fault, and we will not allow them to escape accountability." However, Jake and Shelley were not content with merely sending text messages. They began disseminating false narratives among our circle of acquaintances, inciting them against Laura and me. They accused Laura of being overly dramatic and of attempting to exploit the situation for personal gain. One evening, as we convened with a group of acquaintances at a local cafe, the atmosphere was noticeably strained. Jake and Shelley were notably absent, yet their disparaging remarks had permeated the minds of our companions. One of them, Sarah, confronted Laura. "I heard you were exaggerating the situation," Sarah said, her tone accusatory. "Is that true?" Laura, visibly distressed, replied, "No, Sarah, it's not true." They proceeded to challenge her account. I was the unwitting beneficiary of Sarah's skepticism, which seemed to echo the doubts that Jake and Shelley had planted in her mind. Sarah's response was, "I don't know, Laura. It just seems like you're making a big deal out of nothing." This sentiment was perceived as a betrayal, and Laura and I left the cafe, our hearts heavy. The relentless harassment and gaslighting from Jake and Shelley were taking a toll on Laura's mental and emotional well-being. It appeared that there was no avenue of escape from their toxic influence. We were compelled to take more decisive action to put an end to this nightmare. As the harassment and gaslighting from Jake and Shelley persisted, it became evident that we needed to take legal action to protect Laura and hold Silence accountable. We consulted with a lawyer. He specialized in cases of harassment and assault and assured us that we had a strong case. Initially, Laura was hesitant, fearing the legal process and potential backlash. However, she was convinced by our lawyer that it was the right course of action. With the support of our lawyer, we decided to file a police report. The day we went to the police station was tense. Laura clutched as we entered the building, I could see the fear in her eyes, and my hand was tightly clenched in hers. We were met by a sympathetic officer who assured us that they would take our case seriously. After providing our statements and the evidence we had, the officer explained that there was sufficient evidence to press charges against Jake and Shelley. They could potentially. The officers even confiscated their phones as evidence in the case, marking a small but significant victory. Jake and Shelley had presumed they could evade accountability for their actions, but now they were compelled to confront the consequences of their behavior. The legal process had commenced, and Laura was resolute in pursuing it to its conclusion. However, as we took this step, Jake and Shelley intensified their actions, exhibiting a desperate attempt to regain control over Laura and the situation. They began leaving her unwanted gifts and disturbing notes. Notes left on our doorstep served to further intensify the atmosphere of fear and anxiety. One evening as we returned home from a therapy session, we discovered a bouquet of flowers on our doorstep. Attached to them was a note that caused me considerable distress. "We'll always be watching," it read. Laura's hands shook as she clutched the note, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and anger. "Liam, this has to stop," she said. "They can't keep terrorizing us like this." I nodded in agreement, expressing my determination to document the incident. In light of these recent developments, we will ensure that the relevant authorities are informed. It is important to note that Jake and Shelley have taken their harassment to a new level by involving Laura's parents. They have reached out to them, portraying themselves as the victims and Laura as the instigator. Laura's parents, unaware of the truth, have begun to question their daughter's actions. One phone call from her mother left Laura in tears, prompting her to ask, "Why are you doing this to Jake and Shelley? They have always been good to her." The situation was a source of distress for Laura, who felt as though she was losing the support of her own family. However, she was aware that it was crucial for her to remain resilient and continue advocating for justice, not only for herself but also for the numerous victims of harassment and assault who are often silenced by the filing of police reports and the subsequent pursuit of evidence. As the legal process commenced, Laura and I found ourselves navigating the intricate landscape of law enforcement, the judicial system, and the pursuit of justice. The police officer assigned to Laura's case, Justice, was empathetic and diligent. He assured us that the matter was being taken seriously and that the police were actively pursuing Jake and Shelley. They had already questioned the two of them, and it seemed that the police were closing in on her assailant. One evening after we received an update from the police, Laura and I sat down in our living room. We felt a sense of relief mixed with trepidation. "The police seem determined to bring Jake and Shelley to justice," I said, attempting to reassure Laura, who nodded but displayed a hint of anxiety in her eyes. "It is my hope that the authorities will be able to gather sufficient evidence to ensure that the perpetrators are held to account." Our legal counsel also provided us with guidance and support, helping us to understand the legal process and what to expect in the coming months. He explained that the evidence we had deleted files from Jake's phone and that Laura's own testimony were strong indicators of wrongdoing amidst the ongoing legal battles. Laura commenced psychotherapy to assist her in coping with the emotional and psychological trauma she had experienced. Her therapist, Dr. Evans, was a compassionate and experienced professional specializing in trauma recovery. During one of Laura's therapy sessions, Dr. Evans encouraged her to open up about her feelings and fears. Initially, Laura was reluctant to do so, but as the weeks progressed, she began to share her pain and struggles. "I can't stop blaming myself," Laura admitted one day, her voice trembling. Laura was under the impression that she should have exercised greater caution and that the incident could have been anticipated. Dr. Evans leaned forward, her expression kind and understanding. She advised Laura that it was crucial to recognize that the situation was not her fault and that she had been the victim of exploitation. While it was understandable for Laura to experience a range of intense emotions, Dr. Evans emphasized that these feelings were not grounded in reality. Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. She expressed her desire to move forward and to put the incident behind her. As the therapy sessions continued, Laura began to regain her sense of self. Dr. Evans assisted her in processing the guilt and self. The legal process and therapy sessions were challenging, yet they marked a significant step forward in Laura's journey toward healing. She was no longer alone in her battle against Jake and Shelley, and with the support of the police and Dr. Evans, she found the strength to face her demons and fight for justice. As the legal process continued to unfold, Laura made progress in therapy. Our lives gradually began to stabilize. The situation with Jake and Shelley had quieted down. We had taken measures to protect ourselves and maintain our privacy. However, the emotional scars and the fallout from the incident still lingered. Laura's determination to seek justice remained unwavering. The police had gathered enough evidence to move forward. Given the charges against Jake and Shelley and the prospect of facing legal consequences, we received a call from our lawyer, Daniel, with an update on the case. Laura put the phone on speaker so we could both listen. Daniel informed us that the district attorney was moving forward with charges against Jake and Shelley, who would be heading to court soon. Laura exhaled audibly and a slight smile emerged on her face. "Thank you, Daniel. This is highly significant for us." As the call concluded, it became evident that the journey ahead would remain challenging, yet the advancements made in holding Jake and Shelley liable for their actions offered a glimmer of hope. Additionally, Laura's therapeutic journey had a transformative impact on her. She had developed the capacity to navigate the trauma and guilt, and had begun to rebuild her sense of self-worth. Her self-esteem had begun to recuperate. Dr. Evans had furnished her with the necessary tools to cope with the emotional trauma and had assisted her in reclaiming her sense of self. One day after a therapy session, Laura and I sat down in a nearby park to reflect on how far she had come. She looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Liam, I could not have done this without your unwavering support," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you, Laura, and I will always be here for you." Despite the challenges and adversity we have faced, our relationship has grown stronger. We have experienced the darkest moments together and have emerged from this ordeal as survivors. Despite the ongoing legal battle, Laura is determined to use her experience to help others. In addition, she had begun attending support groups for survivors of assault and harassment, offering a shoulder to lean on and a voice of empathy. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, Laura shared her thoughts about the support group with me. She expressed her desire to use her story to make a difference and to let other survivors know that they are not alone. I smiled and pried at her resilience. It was an admirable way to transform a distressing experience into a constructive outcome. Our journey was far from complete, but we were progressing together, more resilient than ever. Laura's courage and determination exemplified the potency of resilience and the significance of challenging injustice.